so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Julia Dowd. I'm the Director of University Ministry and also one of the co-chairs of the University Council on Jesuit Mission. And on behalf of the Council, I would like to give a warm welcome, especially to members of our leadership team and Provost Council who are here. Thank you so much. And say how proud we are of this book, Living the Mission. This book was a true group effort, a team effort. Many people in this room participated as contributors, as kind of idea generators, as the designers, the OCM staff here. This was all designed in-house and done so beautifully. So thank you to all of you who were part of that. And especially thank you to our panelists here, some of whom were contributors to the book, some of whom not, but who are willing to put themselves forward and kick off this series of conversations. Because the purpose of this book is not just to have something to sit on our shelves, but the purpose is really to stimulate and catalyze conversations here among us, the community of USF, faculty, staff, administrators, and even students, on what it means for us to be a Jesuit Catholic university, how our values are lived out day to day in the operational reality of this school, and what our future looks like based on our Jesuit Catholic identity. And so I want to say thank you to all of you for getting us started on this conversation and for being willing to get us going. This is the first of a four-part discussion, four-part series. The rest of the other panels are all listed on this flyer that you have on your desk, or on your tables. The next one is on November 6th, and then there are two in the spring semester. And these are all going to be led by members of the USF community on various topics that have to do with the mission. And I also want to say, if any of you need extra books, we have plenty, so don't hesitate to take any that you see here today, or contact our office at University Ministry if you'd like extra copies. So again, warm welcome to you all. Thank you for being here. And I'd like to introduce the moderator of today's panel, Anne-Marie Devine, Senior Director of Communications or Media Relations, whom you all know and love, I'm sure, who will introduce the panelists and get us started. So.
Be appropriate just to begin with a little prayer. So if you join me. Loving God, we come to you this hour asking for your blessing as we gather to discuss the mission of the University of San Francisco and its application in our lives. We pray for guidance in this conversation to clearly show us how to conduct our work with a spirit of joy, sincerity, and enthusiasm. Give us the desire to find ways to excel in our personal and professional efforts, bringing our unique combination of talents and perspectives to the forefront in articulating what the mission of our university means to each one of us. Help us to work together and to encourage each other to excellence. Please enlighten the educational environment we provide to our students and to the university as a whole, to be one of discovery and acceptance, to look beyond our own interests and have a sharper focus on the common good for all. May the matters discussed today serve as catalysts to move us forward and cause us to advance, to see growth in all areas of our life. We ask this in your name, amen. So again, on behalf of the University Council on Jesuit Mission, I extend a warm welcome to you all. As Julie mentioned, my name is Anne-Marie Devine, and I do media relations for the university. I was invited to serve as the moderator for this panel discussion, an audience Q&A, and I'm excited to facilitate a really robust conversation kicked off by our terrific panelists. Tim Godfrey is a Jesuit priest and professor in the School of Nursing and Health Professions, whose research areas include immigrant health and nursing and healthcare ethics. Sonia Poole is an associate professor in the School of Management. with a particular emphasis on the ways marketing is used to bring about social change. She explores topics that include marketing ethics and corporate social responsibility. Sean Calhoun is Associate Dean of the Gleason Library. He has worked there since 2001 and has been librarian and department head since 2003. In addition to his responsibilities in the Gleason Library, Sean is a talented photographer who captures our campus events and programs with a very artistic insight. And Pamela Balls Organista is the Associate Dean for Sciences in the College of Arts and Sciences, Social Sciences, excuse me. Her areas of research include health issues in underserved populations, ethnic minority psychology, community-based research, and preventive interventions. Thank you all. So before hearing from them, I wanted to just provide a quick overview of today's program. Once we get rolling, each panelist will share a few minutes of reflection on what USF's mission means to them and how their work, life experiences, and diverse viewpoints shape how they approach living out the mission. After the opening reflection round, myself, fellow panelists, and you as audience members may have a question or comment that's sparked by our openings. And I encourage you to raise your hand and somehow get my attention so that we can facilitate a really open two-way dialogue. This isn't a spectator sport for you guys, so be involved. Our goal today is to build community around the mission while unpacking how we define that term and goal. As a university, we strive to be a safe place, a fair place for honest discussion. Knowing that we may have different opinions or see the world through different lenses, we invite this complexity. Knowing this is a place of dialogue where all points of view can be shared and received in a respectful manner. I was asked to open our conversation today with some thoughts on a journey I embarked on over the summer, the Camino Ignaciano in Spain. The Ignatian Camino is a recreation of a route commemorating the famous 1522 journey made by Ignatius of Loyola, founder of the Society of Jesus, from his home in Spain's Basque Country to Montserrat and Manresa. I felt very fortunate and honored to be part of the USF contingent of 8 faculty and staff members who traveled to Spain to better understand the life of St. Ignatius, and as individuals, were open to what God had in store for us. If you aren't familiar with the life of St. Ignatius, it's worth researching. It's a rather remarkable story of a person who transformed his life, and in the process, revolutionized how spirituality is understood. From starting in the place where St. Ignatius was born, and where he convalesced during the spark of his conversion, we visited some key landmarks in his life. But the moments of spiritual breakthroughs for me took place on the 6 days of walking about 100 miles. The Camino was real and at times raw. It was an adventure in the areas St. Ignatius traveled nearly 500 years ago. Us pilgrims, as they called us, 13 in total, as we were joined by a colleague from Regis University in Denver, 3 colleagues from Regis High School in New York, and 1 Jesuit from Boston College School of Law. We're all approaching this pilgrimage with diverse hopes, expectations, and perceptions. Even though we were walking in groups, and the walking portion of the Camino became deeply personal for each of us. The beautiful Spanish countryside, the people of Spain, and my fellow pilgrims served as a fantastic setting and provided reminders of blessings and support along the way, especially when the Camino got tough. For me, walking that much removed the deadlines, the press releases, and the issues to manage, and allowed me, as one of my favorite Catholic writers describes, to be in the classroom of silence. I was reminded that even as an extrovert with a public-facing profession, there is a need for silence and solitude to reconnect with God. While I believe in finding God in all things, having the time, one step after another, reiterated to me that the busy does get in the way of hearing God in one's life. In addition to reflection, the racked up miles produced another thing: blisters. Now I've come to appreciate the discomfort I felt, but during some moments during the 6 days and 100 miles, I did not feel those blisters were enriching my Camino experience. The blisters pushed me to depend on others and on God in a way outside of my comfort zone. The pain also made me look outward and focus on the prayer intentions that I had brought to Spain with me. For friends and family facing challenges and going through the rough patches of life. It's hard to explain today, but walking through the discomfort allowed me to unite more closely to those prayers and for the people I was trying to lift up. As in many spiritual happenings, it was a feeling of solidarity in prayer and closeness to God that happens in one's heart and rarely can be articulated in words. One evening during a liturgy, my colleague and fellow pilgrim Mike Hughes prayed for all those around the world who have to walk miles and miles each day for the simple necessities of life, like clean water. It was a beautiful reminder and provided yet another perspective gained from this experience. I share this with you because this journey helped me to better understand St. Ignatius, the spirituality named for him, and more deeply connect with our mission in my own way. Getting to experience in action the education of a whole person was not lost on me or my fellow pilgrims. Being part of a university community that supports and encourages its employees to explore and discover in such a hands-on manner is a rare gift, and I am grateful. Now I'd like to invite our panelists to share their reflections. Tim?
I'm Tim Godfrey, as Anne-Marie said. I thought we need to begin with a disclaimer, is that the views expressed here do not represent those of the Jesuit community here at USF, because they really are my views, and I don't even really know what my Jesuit brothers would say about it. So, anyway, you're hearing it right out of the presses here, so I'll find out soon, I'm sure. Several years ago, a friend of mine who I was on staff with at one of our parishes back in St. Louis, she and her husband belonged to a group called the Christian Life Communities. And that is a lay spirituality movement that is founded on the principles of St. Ignatius, much of the same principles that we're familiar with here at USF. Anyway, we were talking and I said something about, oh, it's so neat to hear you talk about our Jesuit values. And she looked at me and she said, Jesuit values? And I said, yes. And she said, I don't see those as being Jesuit values at all. And I said, oh, okay. And she said, we view those as being Ignatian values. And I said, well, what's the difference? She says, I'm not a Jesuit. My husband and I don't live like Jesuits. We are a couple who have imbued many of the processes of Ignatian spirituality. We live according to discernment. We raise our children trying to discern how should we best raise them, where to send them to school, how we're going to budget things. She said we prioritize according to that discernment. She said we aren't Jesuits. We're a married couple who live according to Ignatian values, Ignatian principles. And so when we met yesterday, we were talking about what we would talk about, and they were saying about the Jesuit Catholic values of USF, and they said, Tim, what are you thinking about? And I said, well, I can't quite get beyond the Jesuit to get to the Jesuit Catholic values, because I still stay with what Bridget said to me those many years ago about, I'm not a Jesuit. I am someone who lives by the Ignatian principles. And what I've learned from Bridget and her husband Jerry, as well as others in my own journey, is that in many ways there's much similarity, but there is a difference between how men and women who somehow are touched by the writings of St. Ignatius, who try to incorporate much of what St. Ignatius talked about in terms of his own journey and what he tried to imbue within the Society of Jesus, it is done differently. And what I have found in many ways is that it's a very exciting difference. It's a very humbling difference, because I don't have the corner of the market on it as a Jesuit. I listen to how people are expressing it. And I do hear similarities. There is a common language, but it's different. And so what it does for me, when we talk about living a mission here at USF, for me, the invitation is, first of all, to be a listener, because what I have learned in my own journey as a Jesuit, trying to follow the values of Ignatius, the process of Ignatius, as a Jesuit priest, is that this God is available and is working in many, many, many different ways. Some that I can recognize immediately, oftentimes in ways it takes me a while to get a clue. And when I get a clue, it's like an aha moment. Of course. And I recognize how, in my own parlance, God is working in other people. And so it's been both an exciting journey, it's been a humbling journey, and it's also been a bit of a threatening journey. Because what does that mean for me as a Jesuit? What does it mean for us as Jesuits, as our numbers go down, as more and more people are living this, speaking about it, writing about it? What does that mean for us? What does that mean for us? And so it needs to be continually discerned for us. What does it mean for then a group of men who are poor, chaste, and obedient, try to living this life? What is our mission within a larger context of men and women who somehow feel attracted to the same mission, but express it much differently, live it much differently? So it's both invitation, it's humbling, and it's also challenging for me right now. And I think with that, I'll end and let everybody else talk, because it's, again, further conversation we need to have. Thank you very much.
Sonia?
Hello, everyone. My name is Sonia Martin-Poole, and I'm an assistant professor of marketing in the School of Management. I'm not a Jesuit. I kind of feel like I am coming fashionably late to the party. As far as this is all concerned, I am new to Jesuit principles and values and Ignatian values. Even though I'm Catholic, I really didn't learn about what it meant to be sort of in a sort of a Jesuit, among Jesuits and in a Jesuit community, and having Ignatian values until I actually came to USF. I have been struggling. I had been struggling initially when I first got here to USF, mainly because I work in the School of Management, and as you can imagine, we don't talk about this. I wasn't trained in values and social justice. I was trained in the big P's, which is power, profit, and prestige. And those are generally known to be the goals in management and business, and particularly private enterprise. And so, for me, it was a really difficult thing particularly because I'm a marketing professor, and marketing is related to manipulation, right? That's not a good thing. And so, for me, it was like sort of this struggle between, ideas of evil and good, literally, right? Because of the evilness associated with, marketing. And so I had been struggling when I first got here, and how would I live the mission of the institution in which I work if I teach in a school of management? And what does it mean, to teach students who would, people who would actually go out and become leaders in these industries? What does it mean for me to, sort of teach them and make a meaningful difference in their lives? And so, I went on a quest. And did it in sort of a nation style. I went on retreats. I did the weekend, I first started with the weekend silent retreat, and I then did a week-long retreat, silent, which was very difficult, by the way. I don't know if you can imagine that, but just being quiet for a week was difficult for me, in particular, because I'm the mother of 3 boys, one being my husband. And so my house is very loud, and I have to get loud all the time, talking and yelling, and it's just very, very loud. And I'm also from New Orleans, and so that's, part of who I am. So it's just very difficult. But I went on these retreats, and I learned a lot about sort of what it meant, what Ignatian values truly meant. And I did a lot of reflection during that time and trying to reconcile what I do with what I believe and what I want to do. And so the third thing that I did was that I participated in the 19th annotation, Spiritual Exercises of St. Ignatius. And that was enlightening. Just the very process of meeting with a spiritual director once a week and reading scripture and reflecting, and then noting how would I take what I've learned and what I've talked about and what I've read, and how would I take that into the world? So how would I, act on that? And it was easy for me to do that in my life. I am Catholic. I do go to mass. I'm raising children, so I'm constantly sort of dealing with these ideas of how I'm going to sort of, exemplify this in my life. But it was just very difficult for me in terms of my work in teaching marketing. But I came to some resolution, and what I found was that marketing is not necessarily an evil discipline. That actually it is the art and science of influence at its basic core. And you can use this art and science for good and evil, right? And so in what ways, the question became for me, in what ways can I use this tool, these tactics, these strategies that we learn in business to make the world a better place, to influence behavior so that people do the right thing, right? And so that's what I try to do. In my classes now, I really try to use the practices that I've learned within the spiritual exercises of reflection. And I use it a lot, Ignatian pedagogy. I use it a lot in my classes. And I really would like for my students to not do what I do, but rather do what they need to do to make the world a better place in their own way. And I would like them, in talking about the tools and techniques that we use in business, to learn about and think about how they can best, do that. So that's sort of my, my journey briefly. I seek to always, improve my teaching and connect with my students in many different ways. I also have now focused my research on how I can, integrate Ignatian pedagogy in, my teaching style and my approaches. And so this is what I do. And this is hopefully sort of the beginning of, my journey and learning how to live these values and incorporate them into my work.
Hello? All right. Let's see, I was already introduced. My name is Sean Calhoun. I'm a librarian here at Gleason Library. And first I want to thank University Ministry and the administration for putting this together. Also, it's pretty awesome to be up on a stage with some amazing people. My journey, this is my second career as a librarian. I started out in the technology world, and actually before that, my academic career in very different places. I started higher ed at the University of Washington. Just me and about 120,000 of my closest friends. It wasn't a great fit. My high school, I was one of 3 who graduated. It was a small hippie school up in Seattle. We used to sit around and eat bagels on the floor. Went from there to the University of Washington, and I probably should have known better, but they had a great football program back in the day, and so there I was. It didn't work out very well. Came down to San Francisco, started off in the technology sector and did that for a while. Frankly, got caught up in the bust and got laid off. It was hard. I had 2 kids at the time, a mortgage. It was rough. But I found USF. And, it was funny because in some ways, maybe USF found me. My mom, back in the day, was very, very close friends with Robert Fordham, who runs the Fromm Institute. And I didn't even make the connection. But somehow I ended up here and was applying for jobs. It also turned out that I knew Bill here before I worked at USF. So I already had ties to this place before my first day working here, which was, in hindsight, pretty amazing. So I've been around for about 10 years now, and I guess the stories that I want to tell, as you'll hopefully see, what binds me, and I think us, is this sense of community. And so when I started at USF, one of the things that I heard a lot, which was really troubling, was that students here aren't engaged or weren't engaged, that they weren't involved, that they didn't express care or a sense of humanity about what was going on around them, either here on campus, in the city of San Francisco, or frankly anywhere else. There's this thing going on, this talk about our students. And I figured, well, enough people are saying it, we're all smart, right? So it must be true. But over time, I found a couple of ways to get involved. One of the first things I did was got involved with what was the Forward program, and is now called Muscat Scholars. And if you don't know about these folks, you owe it to yourselves to learn about them. And if you have the opportunity and the time, learn about them by being with them, because that's what I found a way to do. I wasn't invited. No one looked me up, said, hey, Sean. I basically just walked in and said, hey, Charlene, I got to be a part of this. These students are typically first-gen students who somehow found the means and the way to become a part of our community. They come here 2 or 3 weeks before school starts. It's their first residential experience, first time away from home for many of them. I've met kids first time on an airplane. Now, it's 2013. Does that really happen? Yeah. Out here on our campus today are these students who no one in their family has been able to sit in these halls, sit in these classrooms. They're here now. So anyway, that's a pretty awesome experience. And it's continued to be. And at the end of the day, it was sort of the first chink in that story that I heard. These students are here for a purpose, a true purpose. They've made sacrifices to be here. They are engaged. And over time, the other thing, I think you probably, if you don't know me well, you probably know me through photography, right? That guy. Everywhere, right? Well, the backstory there is, so the story was still going on. People were saying our students aren't engaged, they're not involved, they don't care, they don't do anything. Well, I started to go to events where our students are. And what I was seeing and what I was hearing didn't match the story either. Our students are engaged, they are passionate, they're changing the world here, today, now, not in this room, but wherever they are. And so I started to take pictures. And I have no idea if the pictures made any difference, but they helped me feel like I was witness to what was really happening. A funny side story to the photos. I get a lot of very valid criticism about my photography, and it's welcome, all of it. But one thing someone said once is, you never take a photo of the event. All your pictures are of individuals. And you're right, they are. They really are. So, the cynicism that we deal with, you can fight it. And it doesn't have to be the path that I took to do it, but it can be done. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me? Thank you. I'm Pamela Balls-Organista, and it's nice to be here. Actually, as I'm looking into the room, I can see a lot of familiar faces, and so I've been here for a long time, since I know a variety of different people, this is really a pleasure. I'm so thankful for University Ministry as well as the others that have approached me with this opportunity to talk about mission. Because those of you that know me well will oftentimes hear me talk about how drawn I was to USF because of the mission. And so I want to give you a little bit of background information about myself in terms of why this mission has become so attractive to me still today in the work that I do. I was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri, and I'm proud of that. And you have some St. Louis ties, right?
Born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri, myself.
You look and I did grow up in a parish because my family is Catholic too, and my mom was totally into Catholicism in terms of the idea of education. At that time, you know, as a family that didn't come from like highfalutin background or anything, but you know, my dad worked really hard, my mom worked really hard, and my mom felt that one of the things that could save you, and my dad as well, was education. And for a lot of families, the Catholic education was one means that you had to possibly get like a really good private kind of education without paying the high cost. USF accepted today, but it was a route to that. And so I was game for that. You know, we had a parish. You know, I first went to St. Engelbert's, and then I went to Ascension Parish. And I loved Catholic school, actually. I even loved the ritual of Catholicism. I would like go into the church and I instantly felt like it was beautiful. I always felt the Catholic places were quite pretty, and there was a calmness to it that I just felt it worked with my temperament in some ways, this idea of slowing down and being peaceful for a moment. And so I resonated to that, but what I also resonated to was just a lot of the values and principles that I would learn in my education, particularly about how you are in relation to others. And this idea that of being good in many ways, about how you relate to people, how you are there to serve people, how you are not there to judge people, but to really accept people. That those kinds of lessons, maybe because I was open at that time growing up, that they really resonated to me. Now, as I grew up, I remember that I didn't know quite what I would end up doing in my life, but I ended up at Washington University, and I decided that I was going to explore a number of majors before I settled on one. And one of the majors that I explored right away was Black Studies. And the reason why I went to Black Studies was that I said I feel so enriched by the education that I received in Catholic schools. I went to Catholic high school as well as elementary school. But I felt that I was missing learning about culture in a way that probably would be very enriching to me. And I feel that as much as you learn about yourself, you learn about others in relationship to yourself. So I studied, I started taking courses centered on culture, but I also started taking psychology courses too, because I said I want to know about people, because I just felt like this affinity in terms of working with people. So I started taking psychology. Finally, I decided to declare psychology. So I actually ended up with a double major in psychology and Black Studies. And I decided to go into clinical work, which is a story in and of itself that I'm not going to go into the details about. But I said clinical is going to be for me. And I went more westward in my life. I moved to Arizona to go to Arizona State. They had a fabulous program that was centered not only in clinical psychology, but it also had an emphasis in community psychology. And with community psychology, this is a psychology that kind of steps out of just looking at individuals. It looks at individuals in context of where they're living, what they're doing, what society is bringing to them, and how they're relating to society, and that kind of engagement with the world. And I felt that this was a very powerful thing to look at if we had to understand human adjustment. We have to understand more than just the psyche. You need to see how this person is being engaged in this world and what they're giving to this world as well. And so I was intrigued particularly around communities, that commonly are labeled nowadays underserved communities. Most commonly, that would be defined as people that have lesser means. These are poor communities. They don't have a lot to attend to. And at that time, psychology would kind of try to address those issues, but there wasn't a lot of emphasis back then on looking at underserved groups, and that included ethnic minority groups as well. And yet I felt that with my own background, having grown up in St. Louis and been exposed to a diversity of different individuals and groups, that I said everyone needs to think about their own health. And that is an integrative health that includes both mental health as well as physical health. I said, why would any group or individual not need that care, that attention, and that support? So I started getting more into looking at particular groups of people, but it just wasn't my own interest. I started to be called while I was a graduate student even, for my quote-unquote expertise around these issues, and I didn't feel expert in them. In fact, I remember looking at my professor saying, help me, because I hadn't integrated both my interest in ethnic minority groups, poor groups with psychology yet. I wasn't quite sure where that intersection with psychology would occur. But there was times where I got support around that, and times where I felt people were saying, I don't know. And in fact, one mentor, I'll never forget this. I was in my mentor's office. I love this person. This person was an amazing person, really, really supportive of me. And, but I remember at one point I was starting to talk about my interest in looking at these particular groups. And he stopped and he said, Pamela, be careful. I don't want you to become ghettoized by looking at these groups. And I remember in my heart, it skipped to me like, ghettoized? You know, what do you mean by ghettoized? So I said, I want to get real ghetto very quickly. But I thought, really? And I thought to myself, something didn't ring right to me at that moment. Because I said, this person doesn't understand. You know, I've been given this privilege, this opportunity to learn, and I'm interested in it, and I'm being called for this. People need this kind of attention. So I basically kind of shimmied past this person in terms of my interest in what I eventually started to study by the next journey for me, which was my internship at the University of San Francisco, University of California, San Francisco. And at UCSF, I ended up working at the General Hospital as well as the medical center, but I worked at the General Hospital primarily. And are most of you familiar with the General Hospital? Okay, it's located in a Mission. Its motto is as real as it gets. And it lives by that mission, that motto. And so I actually went to this particular internship because it was focused on public service and minority groups. So I ran towards this internship. I said, if they accept me, I feel like this is going to make me stretch. And it actually did that quite a bit. In particular, just to give you an example of that, for several months I worked in psychiatric emergency. And it was a very powerful experience for me to work in emergency, but particularly psychiatric emergency. I feel that part of what USF really pulls towards is this idea of person and this ideal of humanity. And I tell you, if you ever want to get a sense of that, you know, you could do immersions, you could do retreats, but I'm telling you, it's something about working on an inpatient psychiatric emergency unit where you really get in touch with people's humanities. I oftentimes would tell my husband when I come home at the end of the day, I said, you just see people so raw as they're coming in emergently with needs. And it would be sometimes overwhelming because you just say, what could I do for this person? I feel like this person's coming into me, they're acutely psychotic, they are out of control, they're disoriented, they're homeless, they're a little bit violent and agitated. They could calm them down with meds. But you know, what can I do for this person? I have 36 hours of work with them, what can I do? And yet at those moments, I could sometimes make interventions, but what actually was striking to me about that experience is that some of my best moments working emergently with people with overwhelming problems was just coming into the room and being with them and fully trying to listen to them, talk to them, look at them, maybe even touch their hand and comfort them. That was the best moments that I could do for them as a person with all this education and all this privilege of education, was just being real with them. And in fact, my favorite moments would come when I would be able to get somebody fresh from coming into the unit, and I would get to serve them a meal, and I would bring the tray into them and just to see them just eat. They were hungry, and that I could give them something like food at that moment. It just was so incredible. I felt like I could do anything at that moment. It just felt like something, you know, it just felt connected. So when I came to USF, I came here because someone encouraged me to apply here because they said there's a fit here and you fit USF. They wouldn't tell me why. I'd say, why do you think I fit here? So they say, go and apply, you'll see. And I did. As soon as I interviewed here, as a professor, they asked you to give a class. And so I walked into the room and I said, this could work. You know, because I could see each one of my students. And I said, the opportunity here is that I will know each one of these students by the end of the school year. I can do this. I want to be able to know the names of my students. I want to know who are they? You know, what's bringing them here? What is their learning about? How do they learn? How can I best help them learn? And that I love what I teach, and that I want to convey to them this passion and love for learning the way that I have. I told people all the time, I think I started teaching because I love learning so much. And if you have to teach, you have to keep learning. So, you know, that was part of my passion there, but just the engagement part was important. And now I'm outside of the classroom and into my office as an administrator. Being an associate dean actually reminds me of times in psychiatry. I see Judy giving me a thumbs up. In fact, I had somebody say to me, "Oh, you're so calm. You know, you're so calm." And I said, "You don't know what I'm saying." You know? So I just, you know, but I do relish those times because of the end of that lesson is that I thought my first year going into administration was, I'm going to be lonely. I've gotten so much from my colleagues, my peers, and the students that would just come in all the time. I said, I'm going to be lonely in this big old office here. I am not. I mean, I wish I was more lonely. I mean, I need to be alone. By the time I close my door, I need to be alone. But I'm not lonely. In fact, I feel that part of what I've been loving about this experience is the opportunities to connect with the people that I'm there to serve, and ultimately serve those students even at a wider level. And so now I welcome the opportunity to meet with people. I like meetings because I feel if I can script them in some ways, they're going to be good meetings. But I love the opportunity to listen to people and to learn from them that way. So I'm fully present. Some people that know me, they say, Pam, you seem very prepared. I said, you're right. I feel like this is an opportunity for me to connect with you. And when I'm listening to you fully, if I prepared for your visit, or even if you caught me by surprise, let me stop for the moment and be there with you. And that being there with you, fully engaged, open to you, I learned that as a child. I learned that in the church. I learned that at home with my family that can preach. I learned those things. And so I bring those values to a place that I believe recognizes that values, that principles centered around goodness and being for each other is important. So for me, that fit kind of comes all together in terms of living this. And I'm so glad that this was done because it really serves as a catalyst to make us think about what brings us here and how we enact the mission on a daily basis at USF.
Comments or questions that have been sparked by anyone in the audience? If not, I'm happy to kick it off, but still keep thinking. Many of you described in your reflections a positive affiliation with the church, a connection to Catholicism, and I'm wondering if we can get your thoughts on our community members that aren't Catholic, do not have this community to be a part of, and how we make this a place that is totally inclusive of their ideals and place and faith, whatever that might be. What are your thoughts?
Well, you know, I said that I grew up being Catholic, but I come from a family that's quite diverse in terms of this religious faith. And so my treat and my reward as a person growing up was this openness to various kinds of religions and faith, and this sharing of culture, because for me that's part of your culture. And when I think of the folks here, in many ways, even though I was raised in a certain faith and tradition, I've become more, I think, eclectic because of the fact that I've been surrounded by so many different people in my lives that have believed different things. But again, that general belief in humanity, goodness, care, concern, that's kind of like my universals with folks. It begins a dialogue and discussion. I'm curious about people, thankfully, that I feel that when I talk to people about how they believe in things or their faith, that usually there's an openness to that, and that people are inclusive that way, more or less here. So I find that for me, I'm just excited to have that kind of diversity. I'm glad that there's reminders of who we are as an institution, but also that there's a lot of flavor in terms of what we are as an institution as well, because that means that it's for everyone.
Sean, did you have any thoughts on it? You seem to, I'm not putting you on the spot, you just seem to kind of.
Right, so as the guy who didn't mention anything about the church or anything else, yeah, I guess that does kind of put me on the spot. But, you know, not in a bad way at all, right? I'll be an optimist. So, you know, as that guy, right? The beauty of USF for me is that I can be as open and honest as believers, as non-believers. We can all say and do as we feel. There are ground rules. I think Pamela clearly outlined what those are. And thankfully those are a part of who we all are, right? USF tolerates a tremendous amount. It embraces a tremendous amount. But those without humanity, those without care, this isn't their fit, right? And so, you know, as someone who's just curious and wants to learn about people and what makes them tick, there couldn't be a better place for someone like me. And it's funny too, because I think in some ways the bar is still set high, right? It's not as though I can just get a free pass. Oh, I'm not a Christian or I'm not whatever. The standard is still there, and it's clear. But the ways that we can go, the ways that I've been allowed or expected to go about doing what I do, have been tremendous, and I couldn't ask for a better place to be.
Any other thoughts?
I think for myself too, that again, there's a common enterprise in terms of education here. And what is education? I think it's the ability to continue to grow, to learn. As we reflect on what it is that's happening in education around the country, maybe even around the world, in terms of changing of styles, looking at what is it that we continue to work with. And I think that commonality of what is it that we're doing here, and what is the humanism that Sean talked about, how is that present and expressed, finds a home in many different types of traditions. And so I think that if people continue to look at what makes us most human, how does education play into that, and experiences, I think that that offers us a commonality whether you're Catholic or a religious tradition or no tradition, whether there's a fundamental commitment to how can the human person continue to flourish, how can we continue to grow together. And I think that gives us a common language and a common base from which to work.
Hi, I have a question for Sonia. So I'm curious if you could share an example or two of when, in your teaching of your students, there was, or you perceived a potential conflict between how they were thinking about using marketing and what you thought was appropriate, and how you handled that, and how, just an example.
So the question is sort of how, when I see the conflict between marketing and these values, how I handle that in the classroom. So, it's interesting. I mean, marketing brings up some really interesting ethical issues all the time, right? And in particular, when we talk about marketing and manipulation, usually you're thinking about those that, the most disenfranchised of our society. Those who don't have the power. You talk about, people who are of color. You talk about youth, young people, children, the elderly, the poor. And so these are the people that we think about when we talk about, we don't want to manipulate them. That's not a good thing. But I think in general, we can apply those kind of ethical issues to anybody, right? And so we talk a lot in class, and in particular, I teach a course in multicultural marketing. And when I was first given this course, I did not create this course, I was given this course, and I thought, I don't want to do this. I don't want to teach, students how to manipulate, minorities. It just didn't work for me. And then I thought about it and reflected on it, talked to people, and I discovered that I could use probably a lot of the things that I had learned. My undergraduate actually also double majored in African American Studies and economics. And the things that we learned about, the marginalized, I can teach them those things. I can teach them the historical context of people of color in this country. I can use it as an opportunity to instruct. And I think, a lot of students in the business school don't really pay attention to courses outside. Anybody here in the School of Management? Okay, well, sorry, it's out there. They don't necessarily pay attention to a lot of the liberal arts courses, which just shocks me because I'm not a student of business traditionally. I'm a student of economics, so that's from arts and sciences.
Social science.
Social sciences, yes. The School of Arts and Sciences, right? Yes, it is. So I would be under her. And so it's sad, I think, that there's not a whole lot paid attention to humanity and relationships and society in general and how we can come together to make these things better. So anyway, getting back to your question specifically. There are times when we talk about ways that we can influence and communicate to all kinds of groups of people. And the question comes up, well, is this right? Is it good? Is it true? Should we be doing this? And I think that starts students thinking about what they're doing and their role in making this world better or worse. And that they do have the power to influence that. And the whole thing about, oh, well, they would buy it anyway. I mean, even if I didn't do it, somebody else would sell it to them, then, it's okay. But I think that it starts them to think about it, right? To contemplate these issues, and I think that's sort of my role, is to get them to start reflecting. I cannot tell them what to do, but I can expose them to the ideas that they need to discern the right thing.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I don't want to overemphasize this focus on business right now, but I'm new to USF, but it's interesting. Business is on the defensive a lot. business is put on the defensive a great deal, but I see no conflict between properly managing and operating a business, for-profit business, and Jesuit or Ignatian values. I see no conflict at all. And the reason I don't see a conflict is because profit isn't a bad thing. Profit is a good thing. All of us are investing money so that we can someday retire, right? If companies don't make profit, where do you put your money so that it'll grow so you have the money to retire? I'm sitting with folks from the University Advancement Office, right? They want to raise money for the university. Where does the university invest its resources? So we have the resources put on the programs and stuff that we put forward. Business is not a bad thing. Profit's not a bad thing. Some people don't practice business well. So it's our responsibility as professors in the School of Management to teach our students to manage their businesses responsibly. You need to make a return for your investors, but not at the expense of your employees. You need to empower and enable your employees to move, to advance their lives, to advance their careers, to make a better future for themselves and their children. You do that by responsibly operating your business. And I always describe the role of management as the person in the middle that's looking out for investors, employees, and customers. And you stand there in the middle, and it's a balancing act. If you're making too much profit for your investors, then your customers and or your employees are losing. If you're making a responsible profit there, you can take care of your employees and you can take care of your customers. We're not selling people things they don't need. I teach in hospitality, the most basic needs. We travel, we need food and shelter. That's what we do in the hospitality business. We serve basic needs. Matter of fact, it was the religious pilgrims that started my industry, right? It was. That's the history of our industry. Taking care of religious pilgrims. That's how the hospitality industry got started. So, I don't think we need to make excuses for business, but we have to do what, it talks in the mission book. Adolfo Nicolas talks about that whole, we have a mission, one of our goals, he kind of calls an agenda, right, for Jesuit universities, to fight this globalization of superficiality. Okay, responsible business people will fight that, right? And what better way from the inside out by, really creating responsible business people who are going to not sell people based upon the prestige of buying a certain product, but because of the quality of the product and the needs that it fulfills for its customers. We're looking for long-term relationships. And to do it in a way that allows us to provide good jobs and benefits and pay scales and all that sort of thing, and career opportunities for our employees so they can improve their lives. Anyway, I just had to throw that.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
I just wanted to say that I agree with you. I no longer see a conflict, but you have to understand that I think we're not trained in our programs to think that way.
Exactly.
And so that's now my role. My role is to be a part of exposing those ideas to students so that they can then, carry those out in business. I think that I'm coming into a really, it's a really good time, I think, because, young people today are so interested in doing the right thing and doing things that are meaningful and that are going to make a difference in our societies. And we have, the B Corp now that is going to, the whole idea of the B Corp is that it's not about stockholders, it's about stakeholders. And it's not necessarily, paramount to make a profit for the stockholders. You're making a profit so that you can share the wealth. And I think those ideas and those kinds of structural changes that are happening within business are going to really make a difference in, what we see. And I'm very lucky to be teaching during this time, but I was not taught that way.
Right.
Thank you both. I think that's really important to talk about each of our roles. We're going to be unique in that. We're not going to be, I'm not going to be in the classroom with students, but I'm going to be, outside and kind of the external voice for the university at times. And we each have something so unique that we're working on, that we're each a part of the mission in a very special way. So thank you for that business perspective. Anything else from our audience members? One thing you might notice that in the back of the Living the Mission book are some reflection questions. And one I'd like to pose to our panelists now. We hear a lot about social justice on our campus and how social justice fits into our mission and how everything kind of goes back. Well, that's a social justice issue. We need to handle it this way. So I'd like to ask you all, what experiences have shaped your personal understanding of social justice, and how have these experiences influenced, if at all, the way you approach your work at USF?
Well, okay, so, being a kid in the 60s, my dad's African American, my mom's white. Social justice wasn't something that was particularly apparent to me most of my childhood, right? There was no place for me. So, one of my struggles for a long time, probably to this day, is finding a place. And, whatever my beliefs about social justice are they are what they are, shaped by who I am and where I'm from. But there is no place better than here to have those conversations. So, there are a number of folks who I'm lucky enough to have met here at USF who share some of that background, and if there's anything that I've learned is that you, as soon as we try to put people in places or try to think we can shape a box for them, we're going to fail. So, that's where social justice starts for me. It's no more simple than that. I'm not generally someone who's really comfortable talking about diversity. Because the way that we often frame how we talk about diversity, even today, our own institution doesn't really get to the perceptions that I have about it, and the reality that I bring to any conversation about social justice or diversity. So, I think USF's in a great place. I think we all, our hearts are truly in those conversations, but I think we still have a tremendous amount of work to do as an institution. For those of the few people out there who I've heard say, well, they'll take a blah, blah, blah class, and that'll fulfill that need. I think that's where our opportunity as an institution is. As soon as we, you, me, any of us think that somewhere, someone else is going to fulfill that as a requirement, or it's something that our students will get somewhere else, and it's not something that we own, each of us individually, we're missing the point. So for me, that's where that question begins, and I don't frankly have an answer.
So for me, it's about education. I come from, like I said, I'm from New Orleans, and I'm a post-civil rights baby. So, but I came from a family that was heavily invested, or heavily wanted to be invested in education. I'm not the first person in my family to get a PhD. I'm second generation of many PhDs in my family. And the message that was sent to me very early on was that you're not going to get involved in all that stuff that's going on, in terms of, what's happening, all the protesting. Like, that's not what you're going to do. You're going to go to school. And, you know, I remember my grandfather telling my uncle, who went to Harvard, that you are to go to Harvard to get an education, and you are not going to be protesting, and you're not going to be out in the streets, and you're not going to be doing all that. You're not going to be involved in that. I'm paying for it, that's what you're going to do. And that stuck with me throughout college, and actually, you know, surprisingly, went to probably one of the most sort of radical schools. I went to Berkeley, you know, and I think that's sort of where I got my taste of, you know, injustice and doing something about it, and speaking out and having a voice. But I still didn't do anything while I was in school. So when I graduated, the first thing I did was I joined the NAACP. And thinking, okay, this is, you know, I'm gonna make my mark. I mean, I'm gonna do something. It didn't quite pan out the way I wanted to. Actually, was very involved. I actually rose to the ranks of an officer at the national level. I was a youth advisor for the national division of the youth division of the NAACP. But I felt like I needed to do more. I felt like I was part of a large organization that had a long history, and yet I didn't really fit in terms of what I wanted to do. I was very interested in economics, I was very interested in business, and I really felt like that was sort of the way, you know, have that tension between W.E.B. Du Bois, you know, and Booker T. Washington, the whole idea of what is more important. Is it important to, you know, sort of have these talented 10th, which is what my grandfather believed in, or, you know, learn a skill and work your way up and become economically sound. And so I had that tension going on. And what I sort of, I guess, came to was that we need both. That one doesn't sort of overpower the other in terms of, you know, what's better. And I started out teaching economics at the community college level, and my idea was that people needed to understand how the economic systems work. Once they understand that, then hopefully, you know, they'll become a little bit more empowered and sort of help themselves, you know, do better in life. And so sort of that's where I started sort of making my mark, is teaching others. When I graduated from college, I became a financial planner. And I know it just doesn't really sound right, but I was. And, you know, it's like one of those things, I have a job, like I'm just so excited to have a job kind of thing. And I became a financial planner, commission-based. And I had a client, and I was talking to this client about how stocks work, how mutual funds work. And he was like, wow, you know, you should be an educator, you should be a teacher. Like, I get this now. Like, I've never gotten, and the guy was educated, so, you know, teacher, but you should be a teacher. So I figured that was sort of that was my calling. He called it. I should actually go out and teach people how to do this. And that's where it began for me. Teaching people to become empowered economically, to me, is social justice. And, you know, I think that along with that is the education part, right? So, economic empowerment and education, social justice.
I want to be mindful of our time, but Pamela, do you have, or Father Tim?
I want to be very rude because I'm feeling so much of what has been said here, so I say ditto to that. But one thing about social justice that I just thought of immediately was that I have 2 daughters, and I remember just being so amazed as these babies grew up into these little girls, into now a teenage, one of my children is a teenager. And, you know, just every moment of their development has been so profound to me. But what I noticed about my little girls is when they were babies, they started talking very early. I thought developmentally very early. They got maybe smarts too. But they started talking very early. And I remember saying to my husband, oh my God, they really talk well for just being like, you know, a year and a half. I said, we can't even act like we don't understand them. They enunciate well. They're like amazing. But what was really striking to me was not just the acquisition of words, but also the understanding of concepts. And I was so amazed how quickly they understood the concept of fairness. And if you think about it, if you have kids yourself or if you've ever observed kids, this idea, very little, they'll say, no, that's not fair. No fair, you know, and I'm saying, how do they know that? Well, you know, there's something very much, it strikes our core. You know, it takes us aback that we feel that something doesn't strike us as right. You know, it's hardwired in us in some ways. If you take something away from a child too quickly, or if they were enjoying it, you know, they go like this. And so you know, when I think about all the diverse ways that we can define social justice, in some ways it boils down to something kind of catching us, hopefully catching or tugging at our moral core to say, what is this? You know, why is it that this is imbalanced in some ways? Or why has this person had this privilege above this other person that has maybe worked twice as hard towards those things? So in lessons growing up in my life, you know, and I've worked, you know, at a social community-based level with a lot of issues, but even still today in the work that I do here at USF, sometimes I'm called upon issues where people are saying, make it fair, make it right, or let me do my own thing, and you say, that's not right, you know, and you have to try to correct that in some sense, you know, and I'm hoping that as we talk more about the different ways, and what Sean was talking about, maybe even the different ways that we think about social justice or even diversity, that we help sensitize each other to consider those moments of catching ourselves and calling ourselves to ask the question, what is right? What is just? Even if it feels a little bit uncomfortable, or what do I need to understand more about the situation to be right and correct with it? Because when you put that social part into front of justice, it means that you better understand the social dynamics at play to fully comprehend it. So, thank you very much.
Do you have anything to add?
I would add something just to what Pamela said, that not only, I think we forget what you said, what is right and what is just, but also I said what is true. Because I have been very blessed to work as a public health nurse in East St. Louis, Illinois. And I'll never forget one time we had some of the students from one of the area universities come down, and she was starting a group of them, 6 of them were starting a rotation, working at our public health department in East St. Louis. And East St. Louis is one of those communities where you drive around. You don't go into East St. Louis, you don't come in and visit. You drive, the highway goes around East St. Louis, a lot like West Oakland, where I was pastor. So I've been blessed to be in 2 communities where people avoid and they drive around for many different reasons. But anyway, this young woman was saying that, you know, they were joking before we were having our pre-conference and getting ready to go out to the community. She said, you know, my father wanted me to take a gun down here to this neighborhood to protect myself. And it was for my benefit to hear this and also make a joke with the other students. And I said, okay. I said, but guess what? By the time you're done with this experience, I am going to introduce you to people who are so wonderful, who are doing such tremendous things with very little resources, who are working miracles. And there may be drugs, there may be prostitution, there may be, you know, violence. But the biggest story that never gets told, that never gets seen, that no one ever talks about, is how there's such wonderful strength in this community and resilience. And they are doing some marvelous things. You're going to meet some marvelous people, some of the best people you've ever met in your life. And I guarantee you, by the time that you are done with this, you're not going to even be concerned about carrying a gun or anything. You'll be so grateful that you were here in East St. Louis. It's going to be wonderful. And she did. And I introduced you to those very people who I would stand back and just say, you know, I don't use that term, the poor, anymore, or the homeless. I've been blessed to know men and women who may not have the same resources, financial resources that I do. They've got hopes, dreams, and they've got desires. desires, they've got children they love, and they're trying to raise correctly, you know, so that they can have more than what they have. And so I think it's also what's true about people. And so oftentimes we don't get what's true about people, and that also affects social justice. So that's what I have come to learn as I've gone on my journey.
Thank you all very much.
I just wanted to add to that, you know the truth because you've connected with them too, and they have connected with you. That's part of, you know, learning about the truth.
In our final moments, we just have a few minutes. One thing that struck me that Sonia said is that she felt new to the party initially, that she struggled a little bit when she first came to USF. So I'm hoping, you know, a very short tip from each of our panelists of how, the tip that you would give someone who does feel new to the party. How would you recommend that they be engaged?
You all can hear about this, but something came to my mind. So I would say that to really take advantage of the fact that this is a university that feels like a university because it has the resources and the breadth that you would get in a university, but it has an intimacy here. And so you can be visible here in many, many ways. Just as we tell our students, you know, you're part of the community as well. So connecting with another person, helping them connect with you, being open, meet somebody new today in this room. Like I said, I know a lot of faces here, but I've seen some new faces too, so I may try to run and tackle one or two of you after this talk. But, you know, just connecting with people, I think, is the first step towards, you know, becoming familiar with where you're at, part of the community.
Sensible shoes. Sensible shoes, and you know, you don't have to take pictures or find some way though to spend some time outside the classroom with the kids, the young adults who are here. It might be called co-curricular or whatever you call it, but you know. For me, the best thing that's happened is the time I've been able to spend with the young adults outside the classroom. And frankly, even off campus. This Friday, I'm going to take off to the De Young with a group of students. And it's a first-year seminar. These are going to be kids who've never been to Golden Gate Park, who probably haven't been to a museum in a while. And so find ways to connect with people, and hopefully outside the classroom. Classroom's awesome, don't get me wrong. But there's the two sides to what happens with students here, both inside the classroom and outside.
I would recommend that you connect with the university ministry. I think that was sort of, you know, the way that I truly understood what the mission was all about. The plug. Yeah. Right. But the community, I think, you know, sort of getting involved with the community, getting to know everyone, like Pamela said, is really important to understanding what we're about here. And I think once we get to know each other, and we work together, and we really, you know, sort of embody what the mission is, just by communicating and getting involved. So I definitely agree with what you said.
Finally, if we're talking about Ignatian values, one of the things that Ignatius felt very strongly about was we have to get in touch with our passion. What's our deepest desire? And I mean, I think that's a lot ongoing journey, finding what, and we have different seasons in our life. What's our passion one time of our life may be different than the next time in our life. So I would just suggest that you get in touch with what you're passionate about, because that's the gift that you bring to the students, and that's the gift that you bring to us.
Well, will you all join me in thanking our panelists? I'd like to thank all of you continuous conversation about the mission and your role that you play, and keep checking email for the follow-up panels. Thank you.